Okay, hi everyone. So tomorrow is the CET, right? Over the next 3 days, the CET 2021 will finally take place. And we are going to discuss about the exam strategy, right? What do we do? What can we expect in this year's CET? And how do we go about with our 2.5 hours of test taking, right? So what I've done is we have divided this session into 3 parts, right? So I'm going to talk about the 5 important rules that you need to keep in mind. Second, we will look at the overall exam strategy, right? And there won't be one strategy that works for all of you, right? So that's a given. But I'll give you a template in terms of what are the key things you need to keep in mind that will help you to maximize the score. And then third, we would look at the section-wise strategy. Now, before we go to that, one important thing that I'm sure all of you are already aware of is that this year, the agency that is going to conduct the Maharashtra CET has changed, right? So it's no longer IBPS, which historically has been running the Maharashtra CET. This year, it will be Meritrack, right? And that means while the structure of the paper is expected to be the same, you will have the same 4 sections with the same weightage. The types of questions and the level of difficulty that you can expect in this year's CET will be different from last year. Could be same, but it's expected to be different. And whether it's going to be easy or more difficult or on the same lines of difficulty, my take I will share with you at the end of the video, right? So let me first, and I'll keep it short because I do understand that you have to now revise your final day preparations. But let's quickly go to the 5 important things that you need to keep in mind, and that's true for any CET, right? You need to keep that in mind. The first is that the CET is always an exam that tests your strengths and not your weaknesses. So what do I mean by that? We know that there is no section-wise cutoff. B, more importantly, suppose you end up solving 150 questions. That is a serious attempt, and you will be marking all the answers. But if you attempt 150 questions seriously, you are largely now going to be judged by how good you are at those 150 questions, right? You are not going to be judged by the 50 questions that you are left. So it is an exam that basically tests how good you are at what you're good at, and not how bad you are at what you're bad at, right? That's the area that you can leave, because you may not be completing the entire paper. Number 2, and this is to me the most important point, do not be fixated with the minimum number of serious attempts, right? When I say serious attempts, I do understand that last maybe 3 or 4 minutes, most of you guys would end up marking the remaining questions. But a lot of times we tend to look at last year's cutoff, and we tend to look at it in terms of what was the cutoff for JP or what was the cutoff for Sidnam. And then we come to a point where we say that, okay, we have to attempt so many questions. Now, guys, you're going to put unnecessary pressure on yourselves. Just attempt the questions that you think you can answer in those 150 minutes. If it's an easy paper, it's possible that last year's cutoff of Sidnam may not even take you to the number 7 or number 8 school. If it's a tough paper, maybe last year's cutoff of the number 5 school, maybe a Dalmia cutoff might be this year be enough for even the JPs of the world. So you need to be very clear that don't go into it with a fixated mindset. If it's an easy paper, I think you need to be more bullish in terms of your number of attempts. Always start with your best section, right? I have seen a lot of people asking me, should I do my worst section first? Look, a good start is always important. You want to feel nice after half an hour, 45 minutes. So please start with the section that you think is your most productive section. It's a no-brainer. Fourth, make sure that by the end of the paper, although you may end up attempting 160 questions, you have gone through all the questions, right? You've gone through all the questions. I think it's very, very important. A lot of times we don't even see about 30 questions, and invariably we realize that the easiest 10 questions of the paper were in those 30 questions. I mean, that is something you cannot afford to do in a CET paper. So you have to make sure that you have a strategy wherein in those in the given time you have gone through each and every question. Whether you do it or not is your prerogative. And obviously, since there is no negative marking, you would end up marking all the questions by the time you finish the paper, right? So don't leave any question unmarked. That's clear. Okay, now we look at the overall strategy. Now, this is going to be a little tricky because if IBPS was setting the paper, then last 4 or 5 MNCTs have been very predictable, right? So you know what to do. I'm taking 2 scenarios now, right? One scenario is that the types of questions will remain the same as the previous 2-3 years. The level of difficulty will go down, right? Second, the type of questions themselves might change a bit. Okay, I'm going to the first scenario first. If the types of questions are very similar to the last 3-4 years, and I'm sure by now you must have taken quite a few mocks, identify before the exam about 80% of the total attempts, the serious attempts that you're going to make, at least 80% of the questions, you need to be very clear that which are those 80% questions that I'm definitely going after, right? Those are my core areas. Just go through your mocks that you've taken till now and see that is there a pattern to the types of questions you're doing across. You realize that in most of the papers, about 80% questions is something you have always attempted. Okay, the question would be about the remaining 20% questions, right? So if I'm taking an attempt of, let's say 140, 150, right? Let's say that's an attempt. That was considered to be a decent attempt last year. 145, 150 was a decent attempt last year. Then I'm saying that anything around 110 or 115 questions would be something that you have to be very clear that these are the questions I'm definitely attempting because that's my strength. And then the real challenge would be to identify which are the remaining 30 questions from the remaining 80 odd questions or 90 odd questions. So that helps you to save time because you know exactly where you want to, what you want to do. Having said that, the next point C, is going to also warn you that you cannot bring your ego here. There will be those speed breakers, and the speed breakers can come in the areas that you think are your strengths, but you have to understand that this is an exam where I cannot spend more than 2 minutes on any question. So if at all there is a question that I think is my strength, but I'm not able to do it in, let's say, a minute and a half, please leave it. That's absolutely fine, right? You will always get an easy question later. Okay, there are enough options for you. I mean, if you're attempting 150, remember that for every 3 questions you solve, you have to leave 1 question as well. So that's something you need to keep in mind. Expect some new types of questions, right? Because it's a merit track now, there will be a possibility that some new type of reasoning might come in, which has not come in last year, right? And they may be very easy. I think a lot of times we leave a question because it looks very different for us, right? It looks like, oh, I've never done this question before, so let me not try it. At least read the instructions, right? And if the instructions themselves are not very clear to you in terms of what to do, then you can leave it. But otherwise, I would advise you to make sure that you at least go through the instructions before you decide to do it or not do it. Okay, but my take is any new type of questions generally would be easy. So make sure that you don't leave it on the face value. Very important point, intelligent guesswork and elimination of options will be critical. Guys, remember one thing, unlike a lot of other exams that some of you may have taken, like a CAT, for example, when we say that we can come back to a question, in CET, generally you will never get the time to come back to a question. Right? Because you cannot just finish the paper and say now I have some 10 minutes left to go and do the stuff which I had left. There will always be another question that you would get, which you would want to do. So coming back to a question that you already attempted may not happen. And then what will happen at the end? You're just going to mark BBB to all the questions that you have left out, right? Instead of that, if you have spent time on a question, you have eliminated options, right? You're left with only 2 options or 3 options. It's better to mark one of those 2 or 3, right? If you know, for example, that B and C is not the answer, right? It can be A, it can be D, it can be E. Then make sure that you are marking one of them, take an intelligent guess and go ahead. Correct? And most importantly, guys, please give enough time at the end of the test to mark all the questions, right? Because we are dealing with a test which has no negative marking, you have to make sure that you mark all the questions. Let's go now to each section. We'll quickly spend about 2 to 3 minutes on each of them. So be clear. Quant. Now, historically, this has been an easy section. Most people who have taken other exams like the CAT or the SNAP or the MAT would generally find this section quite easy compared to some of the other tests. There will be some different types of questions that will come in. For example, there will be a weightage on data sufficiency, there will be quantitative comparisons, but they are quite straightforward. The one set of questions where you have to be a little careful because they can be nasty is number series. Number series can be a tiebreaker or a speed breaker, rather. And I'm not saying all of them, maybe just one or two of those 5 questions that come can be a speed breaker, so you should be careful over there, right? The most time-consuming questions historically here have been the DI questions, the data interpretation questions. They generally are very time-consuming, not all of them again. So be careful that you are solving all the sets, but in each set you don't have to solve all the questions, right? So you attempt the questions and not the entire set. You may, for example, in one set, you may only choose to do 2 or 3 questions and leave 2 of them, which are expecting you to do a lot of work for 1 mark. So be very careful in terms of leaving. I mean, you are attempting around 40 questions, so it's generally considered a good attempt out of 50. 40, 42, 43 questions, so you're leaving about 7 or 8. Generally those questions will be from data interpretation, right? Data sufficiency, the speed tends to be very high, but the accuracy tends to be low here. There will always be a catch. So this is one area where you can spend an extra 30 seconds just to be sure of the answer. Don't be in a haste in data sufficiency because your accuracy then can go for a toss, right? Your accuracy can seriously go for a toss, so please be careful with that. Okay, but overall, the quant is going to be an easy section, generally is easy. If you ask me this year, I don't see it becoming more difficult than last year. So definitely an attempt of around 40 plus is on, but there will be an audience that I'm talking to right now, which may not like quant, which may hate quant, for whom quant is probably the worst section. Even then, you will probably be looking at attempting at least a 30 to 35 questions, right? So this is one area, because this is not a very time consuming section, right? This is not a very time consuming section. If you leave the 8 or 10 questions, which are fairly time consuming. Let's come to verbal ability. Now, verbal ability, again, if I go with the last few years pattern, there are going to be about 20 odd questions on reading comprehension and parajump build. They are the only ones which will take time, but the RCs in CET are relatively straightforward. The content or the language is straightforward. They are not very difficult. The questions are not as tough as some of the other exams some of you may have taken. So you can be a little bullish in terms of your attempts and the speed, right? In RC, you don't have to be very conservative the way you probably were in dealing with reading comprehension of, let's say, an exam like CAT. Okay, and the rest of the questions are going to be all on grammar and vocab. Now, the good thing is that these are very, very high speed questions. You could probably attempt them in less than 15 minutes, or barring the RC questions, you could finish up the entire section in 15 minutes. Having said that, there may be questions that you may not know the answer to. For example, vocab, right? Now, again, I would say, if you've gone through a vocab, you don't know the answer, but you are in a position to take an intelligent guess, please do that. There's no point in leaving it completely and then going for a complete tukka at the end of the time period, right? Last 2 minutes, you're going to mark something which you have no control on. So, for example, if you are asked the antonym of malevolent, now that's a pretty straightforward word, but malevolent, suppose let's understand that you don't know the meaning of malevolent, but at least you know that mali is something negative, and you know that the opposite of that has to be something positive, right? and you realize that two of those options sound positive to you, the other two are clearly negative, you know that it's going to be one of those two or three options, you might as well take an intelligent shot. There's no point in just leaving it completely and saying I'll come back to it. Chances are that you're not going to come back to it, right? You will not get the time to come back to it. So take intelligent guesses in word-based questions or even in reading comprehension, right? If you're stuck between two options, I think it's better to go with your gut feel, not spend more time, go with your intuition, mark it and go ahead, right? You don't want RCs to be speed breakers. They are not. So don't create unnecessary speed breakers for yourselves by being conservative in RC. Most of the RCs are going to be pretty straightforward. Okay. Reasoning. Now, this is the big section, right? In terms of why I'm saying the biggest challenge is because there are 75 questions in reasoning. Again, if I go with history, this has been the toughest section, right? There's been no doubt about it. And one of the reasons why a lot of people do not do well in an exam like CET is because they bang on this section rather than banking on the math and the CET, which are math and the English, which are relatively more scoring or high speed sections. Reasoning has been historically very tough, and what has made them tough have been specific questions. So if you look at the last year's paper, there were 7 sets on puzzles and seating arrangements, right? And they have been tough. But the reason why they have been tough is because the paper was set by IBPS. If you go back and check the IBPS papers, IBPS is the body that used to conduct exams, or is the body rather that conducts exams for banks. You'll realize that the IBPS papers are extremely tough on the reasoning section. And they carry the same sets even in the CET. Now this year, my take, and I told you I will say it at the end, we are almost reaching the end, so I'll disclose. My take is that the level of difficulty this year might not be the same, it might be a little easier than last year, right? So I would not, my strategy has always been to tell students to attempt the puzzles and seating arrangements last, because that's close to 60% of the paper, close to 60% of the paper. Sorry. The remaining 40% is on verbal reasoning and the core LR, right? So that is your input, output, and blood relations and directions and coding, decoding, the pure AR rather. That's your, those are easy questions, right? Those are historically very easy. So attempt those questions first. There'll be about close to 16 to 17 of those questions, input, output, blood relations, and so on. There will be 15 to 16 questions on verbal reasoning, which is again quite straightforward. Don't waste time on it. Go with your gut feel, mark it, and go ahead. But the puzzles is something I would personally look at last. In maybe the last half an hour, I would try to solve as many puzzles as I can. Having said that, there is a fair chance that this year the level of difficulty of the puzzles might go down. And if that happens, if the puzzles this year are easy, then don't be surprised if the cutoffs will go up by about 10 to 12 marks. There will be, that possibility is always a very strong possibility, right? Okay. Last is abstract reasoning. Now again, if you go back, this has been relatively the easy one. Out of the 25 questions, only about 5 to 6. So you have to know the types you are comfortable with. So there are about 4 or 5 types of questions in abstract reasoning that will come. So last year, I think there are only about 3 types of questions that came in. You have to be very clear about which are the types you are comfortable with and which are the ones you are not, right? So suppose you are not comfortable with a particular type, those 5 questions you can just leave. And when I say leave, I'm not saying leave completely. I'm saying do it last. Do the other 18 or 20 questions first, and then you can spend time on the. So knowing what you want to do first is very important. That really helps you to save time, right? So as I said, almost 80% of the questions that you're going to eventually attempt is something you have to be very sure about, that this is my strength and I'm definitely going after it. Okay. There will be those 5 to 6 speed breakers that will take time. I mean, these are again going to be similar to a series kind of questions where even after a minute and a half, you are still clueless about it. You don't know what's happening. Please leave it, right? So A good attempt here could be about 18 odd questions, 18 to 19 questions could be good, can be a good attempt. If I were to add up all of this, your math and verbal attempt ideally needs to be very close to about 40-40. And your attempt in abstract reasoning is about 20. So math, verbal, and abstract is close to 100. The 75 questions of reasoning will determine whether this paper is going to be easy or difficult or moderate. If abstract, if the reasoning section, the 75 marks of reasoning is tough, then the overall cutoffs might be similar to last year, around 130, 135, 140. That range will be for the top schools. But there is a very high chance that the overall level of difficulty of this year's paper might be easier than last year. There is a chance, I'm saying. Don't go with the mindset, because if you go with that mindset, then I have a problem. If the paper is tough, it can really make you very, very nervous. So go with the open mind, but be open to the fact that the paper can be easy. And if the paper is easy, I may have to attempt 155, 160, which is a good 15, 20 questions more than last year to make it to the top schools, right? One last point before I go ahead. All that I'm talking till now is for people who are aiming for those 140, 135, 140. I do understand that some of you who are watching this video in your mocks are able, if you're attempting only about 120 odd questions, like 115, 120, 125 questions, there will be that audience as well. For to those, I'm saying, please do not be too bothered about it. Do not go into this exam with a mindset that I have to attend 160, but also do not go with a mindset that I cannot attend more than 120. Just go and say that if the question is simple, I'm going to go flat out, finish it off, go to the next question, right? If you feel the paper is easy, all it means is that don't be conservative, just be bullish in terms of your attempts. Try to solve as many as you can, right? And make sure that you do not lose your cool, irrespective, right? Irrespective, you do not lose your cool. Keeping a calm mind, a calm head is very, very important towards doing well in any exam. So with that, I will wish you all the best. Do well, crack this test. Bye. I wish you all the best from Career Launcher. Bye, guys.